The world changed while most people were scrolling past headlines. In February of 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes deep into Iran. The targets were Iran's nuclear facilities, its ballistic missile production sites, its air defense systems, and its leadership. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, the man who had ruled the country with absolute authority since 1989, was killed. A man who had survived the Iran-Iraq War, survived decades of American sanctions, survived internal uprisings and assassination attempts, dead. The shock was immediate and global. Even governments that had no sympathy for Khamenei understood what this moment meant. A sitting head of state, targeted and eliminated by a foreign military alliance. The rules that had quietly governed international conduct for decades, rules that said you could bomb facilities, you could sanction economies, but you did not kill the leader. Those rules were gone. Iran's response was swift and coordinated. Ballistic missiles were launched toward Israeli cities. Drone swarms hit American military bases across Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf states. Iranian proxy forces from Yemen to Lebanon activated simultaneously. Hezbollah fired rockets into northern Israel. Houthi forces in Yemen resumed attacks on Red Sea shipping. Arab states that had allowed American forces to use their territory found their oil infrastructure targeted by Iranian strikes. And then, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. That decision, those 4 words, reverberated across every economy on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow channel of water, only 21 miles wide at its tightest point, sitting between Iran and Oman at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. Through that gap, before this war, 20 million barrels of oil flowed every single day. 20% of all the oil traded by sea on the entire planet. Saudi Arabia's oil goes through there. The UAE's oil goes through there. Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, every drop goes through that channel. There is no alternative route capable of handling that volume. When Iran closed it, the world's most critical energy corridor went dark overnight. Major shipping companies pulled back immediately. Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, CMA CGM, every name that matters in maritime commerce suspended transits. War risk insurance premiums spiked to levels not seen in decades. Some underwriters refused to cover the route at any price. Iranian Revolutionary Guard vessels began boarding and attacking ships. At least 3 tankers were struck in the early days, 1 set ablaze off the coast of Oman. By April, 230 fully loaded oil tankers sat at anchor inside the Persian Gulf, going nowhere, just waiting. Oil prices responded instantly. Brent crude climbed past $100 a barrel. Every dollar increase translated directly into higher prices at fuel stations, higher costs for airlines, higher manufacturing costs for everything made with petrochemicals, which is plastics, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, synthetic fabrics, packaging. The cost of moving goods by sea also rose because ships run on fuel. Inflation that had just started coming down in many countries began climbing again. Russia benefited. Russia exports oil and does not route it through the strait. As global prices rose, Kremlin revenues increased, at the exact moment Western sanctions were supposed to be strangling them. The irony was brutal and widely noted. The United States responded on multiple fronts. The International Energy Agency authorized the release of 400 million barrels from the strategic reserves of its 32 member countries. Washington temporarily lifted sanctions on some Russian oil and Iranian oil already in transit, a remarkable reversal that showed how serious the supply crisis had become. Then, in April, the U.S. launched a counter-blockade, declaring it would enforce restrictions on ships attempting to reach Iranian ports. Iran called it an act of war. On May 4th, Trump announced Operation Project Freedom, U.S. Navy warships physically escorting merchant vessels through the strait. Iran's Revolutionary Guard warned it would treat any military vessel approaching the strait as a ceasefire violation. 2 days later, Trump paused the operation, citing progress in negotiations. Markets rallied. Then, US and Iranian forces exchanged fire in the strait. Small boats, drones, a brief and dangerous clash. Both sides blamed the other. Oil prices spiked again. Trump called it just a love tap and said the ceasefire was still in place. He also warned that if Iran did not agree to terms, the bombing would resume at a much higher level than before. As of today, barely 5% of normal shipping volume is getting through the strait. Pakistan is mediating talks. Iran wants the American blockade lifted. America wants verifiable nuclear commitments. Israel wants Iran's enrichment infrastructure dismantled permanently. China and Russia vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for freedom of navigation. The ceasefire is fragile. The outcome is uncertain. Now China. Because while bombs were falling on Tehran, one of the most consequential diplomatic moves of the decade was quietly taking shape. A cruise ship called the MV Hondius was sailing through the South Atlantic in early April 2026 when passengers began falling seriously ill. By the time anyone fully understood what was happening, people had already died, and infected passengers had scattered across multiple countries and multiple continents. On May 2nd, the World Health Organization received notification from UK health authorities about a cluster of severe respiratory illness aboard the vessel. By May 4th, there were 7 cases, 2 laboratory confirmed, 5 suspected, and 3 people were already dead. The illness progressed rapidly: fever, gastrointestinal symptoms, then pneumonia, then acute respiratory distress, then shock. The speed of deterioration was alarming to the doctors who saw it. The virus was identified as hantavirus, specifically the Andes strain, which originates in rodents in South America. Most hantavirus infections happen when people inhale particles from infected rodent droppings or urine. What makes the Andes virus uniquely concerning to scientists is that it is the only known hantavirus strain documented to pass from one human to another. That transmission is rare, but it has happened. In a 2018 outbreak in Argentina, the virus spread among people seated near each other at a birthday party. As of today, there are 8 confirmed or probable cases and 3 deaths. Hospitalized patients are spread across South Africa, Germany, the Netherlands, St. Helena, Spain, and Switzerland. The ship is heading to the Canary Islands. Before the outbreak was fully understood, passengers had already disembarked and returned home across dozens of countries. The cruise operator is now tracking everyone who boarded since March 20th, passengers from nations across Europe, the Americas, and beyond, long since back in their homes and communities. France identified 8 nationals who sat near a confirmed case on a commercial flight between St. Helena and Johannesburg on April 25th. 1 is showing mild symptoms. In the United States, the CDC has issued a health alert to doctors nationwide. At least 9 American residents across 6 states are being monitored. The agency is clear that broad spread to the general public is considered extremely unlikely, but it is watching. The WHO Director of Epidemic Management addressed the world directly this week. Her words were precise. This is not the start of a COVID pandemic. This is not COVID. This is not influenza. It spreads very, very differently. The global risk assessment remains low, but the pattern is what unsettles people. A mysterious illness on a ship, passengers dispersing globally before it was detected, health authorities racing to trace contacts across borders. Multiple countries involved simultaneously. Anyone who lived through early 2020 recognizes the shape of this story, even if the details are entirely different. The mortality rate for severe hantavirus pulmonary syndrome is approximately 38%. More than 1 in 3 patients who develop the serious respiratory form of the disease dies. That is why doctors are being alerted. That is why contact tracing is happening across 6 countries simultaneously. That is why this story, buried beneath war and trade wars and political scandals, deserves your full attention. Now the Epstein files. Because this story, which should have dominated a full year of news coverage, keeps getting pushed aside by every other crisis erupting simultaneously. but it matters. What has been revealed in these files is a window into how power actually operates at the highest levels of global society. Jeffrey Epstein was an American financier who spent decades building a social network that included presidents, prime ministers, royalty, billionaires, Nobel laureates, and celebrities. He was convicted in 2008 of soliciting prostitution from a minor, served less than 13 months in a minimum security facility with work release privileges, and was released. The sweetheart deal that allowed this outcome became one of the great scandals of American legal history. In 2019, he was arrested again on federal sex trafficking charges. He died in prison that August. The official ruling was suicide. Significant questions about the circumstances of his death have never been fully resolved. For years, the evidence collected by the FBI, flight logs, contact books, emails, photographs, video files, financial records, remained sealed. In November 2025, Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Trump signed it. The Justice Department released documents in waves. On January 30th, 2026, over 3 million additional pages were released, including 2,000 videos and 180,000 images. A sixth release followed in March. What emerged from those millions of pages reshaped careers, ended reputations, and triggered criminal investigations across multiple countries. Lawrence Summers, former U.S. Treasury Secretary, former president of Harvard University, board member at OpenAI, had emails released showing him asking Epstein for dating advice about a woman he described as his mentee. Summers resigned from Harvard, from OpenAI, from every institutional role he held. Former Norwegian Prime Minister Thorbjørn Jagland has been charged with aggravated corruption, with files showing Epstein enlisted him to help approach Russian leaders, including Vladimir Putin. Prince Andrew, now formerly Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, stripped of royal titles, appeared in new photographs, prompting the extraordinary spectacle of British Prime Minister Keir Starmer calling on him to appear before the United States Congress. Howard Lutnick, Trump's own Commerce Secretary, appears in files showing he had planned a visit to Epstein's private island in 2012. A previously unknown DEA investigation into Epstein was revealed. A 5-year probe targeting him and 14 other individuals for suspicious money transfers tied to alleged drug trafficking and prostitution. That 69-page document remains heavily redacted. 14 names remain blacked out entirely. 2/3 of Americans, in polling conducted this year, said they believe the government is deliberately withholding information. 18 survivors issued a joint statement saying, and these words need to be heard, once again, survivors are having their names and identifying information exposed, while the men who abused us remain hidden and protected. The Justice Department claims it has met its legal obligations. Lawmakers who authored the transparency legislation disagree. They believe over 6 million pages of relevant material exist and that less than 4 million have been released. The fight over what remains hidden is ongoing. Step back now and look at all of it together. A war that killed a head of state, closed the world's most important oil corridor, sent prices surging, and left a fragile ceasefire one miscalculation away from collapse. A trade war between the two largest economies on Earth, now heading toward a summit that may formalize America's acceptance of China's economic model. A viral outbreak spreading across 6 countries via a cruise ship, with passengers dispersed globally before anyone knew what was happening. And a trove of documents revealing how power, wealth, and impunity operated for decades at the very top of global society, with names still being protected and survivors still fighting to be heard. These are not separate stories. They are connected. They are all happening at once. And the decisions being made right now, in negotiating rooms, in naval command centers, in courtrooms, in public health offices across 6 continents, will define the next decade. You are not supposed to see all of this clearly. The volume of news is designed, whether intentionally or not, to overwhelm, to make you feel that it is too much, too complicated, too distant to matter to your life. It is not too distant. The oil in that strait determines what you pay to fill your tank. The trade deal in Beijing determines what your electronics and medicines cost. The virus on that ship is being tracked across your country right now, and the men whose names are still blacked out in those documents have shaped the world your children will inherit. Stay awake. Stay informed. That is the only defense any of us has.